Imagine waking up one morning and half of your street is gone. Not moved away, not traveling, gone. Buried in pits dug too quickly, by hands too tired, and numbers too large to count. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, your street would lose half of what was left. This actually happened. Not once, not in one city, but across an entire continent, over and over again, for nearly 5 years. And by the time it was finished, it had killed more people, more quickly than almost any event in human history. It reshaped economies. It rewrote laws. It changed how humans thought about God, about death, about each other. This is the story of the Black Death, and how one disease changed the entire trajectory of human civilization. Let's start with the basics. The Black Death was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. You don't need to remember that name. What matters is how it moved. It traveled inside fleas. The fleas lived on rats. And the rats lived on ships, the same ships that were busy connecting the medieval world through trade routes stretching from China to the Mediterranean to the ports of Western Europe. Historian Ole Benedictus spent decades reconstructing the path of the disease and concluded that it likely began somewhere in Central Asia, carried along the Silk Road by merchants who had no idea they were transporting the most devastating biological event in recorded history. By 1347, it reached the Crimean Peninsula. From there, it boarded ships bound for Sicily, and once it touched European soil, it did not slow down. Within 2 years, it had reached nearly every corner of the continent: France, England, Germany, Scandinavia. Historians estimate that the Black Death killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Not 30 to 60% of those infected, 30 to 60% of everyone. Entire villages disappeared completely, with no one left to bury the dead or even remember that the village had existed. Think about what that actually means. Imagine standing in a room with 10 people you know. Now imagine that by the end of next year, somewhere between 3 and 6 of them are dead. That is not an exaggeration. That is the literal, documented reality that medieval Europeans lived through. Why was it so deadly? Partly because medieval medicine had no concept of bacteria or germs. Physicians at the time believed disease spread through something called miasma, bad air supposedly caused by planetary alignments or moral corruption. Doctors wore long-beaked masks filled with herbs, believing the scent would protect them from poisoned air. It did nothing. The masks have become an iconic image of the plague, but they represent something deeply tragic: humanity desperately trying to fight an enemy it could not even properly see. Without understanding the actual cause, there was no real defense. The disease spread through flea bites, through contaminated air in its pneumonic form, and through direct contact with infected bodily fluids. Symptoms appeared with horrifying speed: fever, vomiting. Then the buboes, swollen, blackened lymph nodes, usually in the armpit, neck, or groin, which gave the disease its name. Death often followed within a week, sometimes within a day. Contemporary chronicler Agnolo di Tora, writing in the Italian city of Siena, described burying his own 5 children with his own hands because no one else was left to help him. He wrote that so many died that people believed it was the end of the world. Historians now consider his account one of the most haunting first-hand records of the pandemic, precisely because of how plainly he described the unimaginable. But here is what makes this story more than just a catalog of horror. The Black Death did not simply kill people. It broke the entire structure of medieval society. And in breaking it, it built something new. Before the plague, Europe operated under a rigid feudal system. Peasants were tied to the land, bound to work for noble landowners in exchange for protection and a place to live. There was almost no social mobility. You were born into your role, and you died in it. Then suddenly, a third of the workforce was gone. Historian Barbara Tuchman, in her work on this period, described the labor shortage that followed as one of the most underappreciated turning points in Western history. With so many peasants dead, the survivors discovered something they had never had before: leverage. Landowners desperately needed workers to farm their land, and for the first time, peasants could demand higher wages, better treatment, even the right to leave one estate and work for another. Many nobles tried to fight this shift with law. England passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351, attempting to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and criminalize peasants who left their employers for better pay. It largely failed. The economic pressure was too strong. Wages rose anyway. Serfdom, the backbone of feudal society for centuries, began to crack. This is the part that surprises people most. The Black Death, one of the deadliest events in human history, helped trigger the slow decline of feudalism and contributed to the eventual rise of a wage-based economy. Some historians argue it indirectly helped set the stage for the Renaissance itself, by redistributing wealth, weakening the rigid social hierarchy, and forcing European society to rebuild itself from devastation. The plague also changed how people thought about religion and mortality. Before the pandemic, the Catholic Church held near total authority over how Europeans understood death, sin, and divine judgment. But when prayers failed to stop the dying, when priests died at the same rate as everyone else, that authority cracked. Some people turned to extreme religious devotion, joining groups of flagellants who whipped themselves in public, believing only the most severe penance could appease a furious God. Others turned away from the church entirely, losing faith in an institution that could not explain or prevent the disaster unfolding around them. Art from this period shifted dramatically. A new visual tradition emerged called the Danse Macabre, the dance of death, depicting skeletons leading kings, popes, and peasants alike into the grave. It was a blunt, visual reminder that death made no distinction between rich and poor, powerful and powerless. Historians see this as one of the first widespread cultural acknowledgments that mortality was the great equalizer, regardless of status or wealth. And there's one more thread to this story, one that connects directly to the world you live in today. The labor shortage and social upheaval caused by the Black Death also accelerated technological innovation. With fewer workers available, there was increased incentive to develop labor-saving devices and more efficient agricultural techniques. Historians studying this period have pointed to increased investment in tools, mechanical devices, and improved farming methods as a direct economic response to the population collapse. So here is the strange, almost unbearable truth at the center of this story. The worst catastrophe in medieval history, a disease that killed tens of millions of people in the span of a few years, also quietly cracked open the door to modern economic and social structures. It did not do this gently. It did not do this kindly. It did it through unimaginable loss, grief that historians still struggle to fully convey, and a depopulation so severe that some regions did not recover their pre-plague population for over a century. But it happened. The wage-based economy you live inside, the social mobility you take for granted, the idea that your circumstances of birth do not have to permanently dictate your circumstances of death. These emerged, at least in part, from the wreckage of one of the darkest periods humanity has ever endured. The Black Death did not just take lives, it rewrote the rules, and every time you negotiate a salary, change jobs, or build a life different from the one you were born into, you are living inside the long, complicated aftershock of a pandemic that ended 700 years ago, a tragedy so vast it accidentally reshaped what it means to be free.